Welcome back to EWTN News, continuing live coverage of Pope Benedict XVI's apostolic journey to Cuba. And from here on out, it's only Cuba. He just left Mexico a few hours ago, and now Pope just touched down in Santiago, Cuba. I'm Raymond Arroyo, joined on set by Father Roberto Cid, the director of Radio Paz in the Archdiocese of Miami. Thank you for being here, Father.
Thank you for having me.
Now, earlier today, Pope Benedict, as we told you, he left Guanajuato, Mexico, and he touched down now at the Antonio Maceo International Airport in Santiago, Cuba. There are people along this rather aged-looking airport. It looks like a movie set almost from the 1930s or 40s. But they are greeting the Pope. You see here the Alitalia jet just touched down. It's coming into place by that red carpet that's been set out. And Raul Castro, who's the man walking in the middle of your screen there, Fidel Castro's brother, the president of Cuba, is going out to greet Pope Benedict. And in a moment, you will hear an address that, from the briefings, we're told is going to be very direct, so you'll want to stay tuned.
That's the Archbishop of Santiago, Cuba, and the Nuncio, I think. And you know, the full name of Antonio Maceo, who was a Cuban patriot, was Antonio de la Caridad Maceo. Antonio of Charity.
Maceo. A connection to Our Lady of Charity, who we will hear much more about in the coming days. Our Lady of Charity, really, we should say, the Pope will be going to El Cobre, which is the shrine of Our Lady of Charity, Our Lady of Caridad. There is a deep devotion in the Cuban psyche to Our Lady of Charity. She really helped define not only the faith, but the nation. So I expect we will hear Pope Benedict trying to touch off and make that connection between Our Lady of Charity and the future of Cuba.
Of course. And then one thing that the bishops of Cuba have been promoting as a way to prepare for this 400th anniversary is precisely the fact that the Virgin Our Lady of Charity, the Blessed Virgin Mary, unites all Cubans across ideologies, across races. And one of the things that the bishops of Cuba have pointed out, for example, to illustrate this point, that this is a historical fact, that when Ernest Hemingway got the Nobel Prize in Literature, he wanted
Old Man in the Sea.
Yeah, he wanted to give the medal that he was awarded to Cuba, and he found no better way of showing that fact than to bring it to Our Lady of Charity. So a very important factor in Cuban life from the dawn of its history as an independent nation.
And this is the 400th anniversary
of the
finding of the statue of Our Lady of Charity, which is a wooden statue that, according to the story, was found bobbing in the water, and there was an inscription on the wood there.
Yes, I am Our Lady of Charity, on the Bay of Nipe. And then it was preserved in the eastern part of Cuba, and in the early 20th century the current shrine was built.
And there is Pope Benedict emerging from the Alitalia jet. This is Santiago, Cuba, at the Antonio Maceo International Airport, and the beginning of the welcoming ceremony for Pope Benedict. Raul Castro, Fidel Castro's brother, the president of Cuba, is present. And in a moment we will hear both Raul Castro and Pope Benedict. There he is greeting Mr. Castro on the tarmac in Santiago. The beginning of a two-day visit. The Pope will
There's the Archbishop of Santiago, Cuba, Archbishop Dionisio García Ibáñez,
Erzbischof von Santiago de Cuba,
who is an engineer. He's a late vocation.
Es ist früher Vormittag auf Kuba.
The little children have come forward to present the Pope with some flowers.
Eine kleine Delegation von 4 Kindern überreicht dem Papst ein paar Blumen. Bienvenido in
Of course, also Santiago is a historical diocese in Cuba. The Archbishop of Santiago is the primate of Cuba, and among his predecessors there is a saint, Saint Anthony Claret, the founder of the Claretian
Nach der
priests,
Begrüßungszeremonie
the missionaries of Mary Immaculate.
wird der Papst nach einer Pause von mehreren Stunden hier auch gleich eine Messe feiern, Freiluftmesse.
Pope Benedict now walking that long red carpet to the stage where the welcoming ceremony will begin. There'll be an address by both heads of state. We should remember the Pope is the head of Vatican City State. And the Church here has been embattled for a good long time. Since the Castro Revolution, the faith has been suppressed, the freedoms greatly limited to public worship. They can still have ceremonies and rituals in the churches, but not in public. It's very limited.
Yeah, Catholic schools were closed down,
right.
Religious expelled, even priests of Cuban by birth. Mm-hmm. That's the national anthem of Cuba.
Yes. We'll let you listen to the national anthems as they play.
In Santiago de Cuba und in der Hauptstadt Havanna wird Papst Benedikt jeweils eine Messe feiern. Ein Treffen mit Präsident Raul Castro und über den Hochlichkeitsbesuch ist geplant in Havanna. Eine Begegnung mit dessen Bruder Fidel ist nicht ausgeschlossen, aber eben auch nicht beschränkt. Oppositionelle klagten im Vorfeld Sicherheitskräfte behinderten die Teilnahme an den päpstlichen Veranstaltungen, was ein Indikator für die doch nicht ganz so entspannten Verhältnisse zwischen Kirche und Staat. Man kann fast nicht umhin, bei einem Papstbesuch auf der sozialistischen Insel einen politischen Blickwinkel einzunehmen. Der Besuch an sich ist politisch. Man kann nicht umhin, das so zu sehen. Nach Angaben der kubanischen Opposition sind vor dem Besuch von Benedikt Dutzende Regierungskritiker festgenommen worden. Aber diese Repressalien, kleineren und größeren, sind in einem freudigen Moment der Ankunft auf dem Flughafen zunächst mal einfach beiseite geschoben. Es klingt gerade die vatikanische Hymne, Salutschüsse werden abgegeben. Alle sind entschlossen, das Beste aus dieser Begegnung zu machen. Die kubanische und die vatikanische Flagge wehen vom Hangar. Der Wind macht dem Papst ein wenig mit seiner Kleidung zu schaffen.
And now the Vatican national anthem, I imagine, will be sounded.
That was just it.
Just played.
They were played back to back.
Ah.
I guess they're getting ready for a parade.
Mm-hmm. There'll be a military review here.
Your Holiness Benedict XVI. The honor guard is formed, and the chief of the honor guard is Colonel Guerrero Perez. That's what he just said to the Holy, shouted to the Holy Father.
Ungefähr 100 politische Gefangene freiließ. Menschenrechtsorganisationen haben kritisiert, nun diese Freigelassenen wurden gleich ins Exil gezwungen, aber die Bischöfe auf Kuba haben dennoch das Verhandlungsergebnis verteidigt und das als humanitären Fortschritt gesehen.
Here comes the honor guard.
Die Mehrheit der Freigelassenen hätten der Ausreise nach Spanien ja auch zugestimmt. Einige, die jetzt noch hinter Gittern sitzen, wollen im Land bleiben. Hieß es dann.
It's reminiscent of the Soviet
Doch die Vorgänge sind
style.
schon recht klar so einzuordnen.
Of the Soviet era.
It is, you're right.
Möchte sich der Opposition entledigen und die Kirche kann sich von Fall zu Fall nur bemühen, ein Bleiben zu erreichen.
And only, just in the early 90s is when this government officially became a lay government. Prior to that, it was an atheist government by law. So things have slowly thawed since the 14-year-old visit of Pope John Paul II. There has been a gradual lessening of tensions between the government and the church here. The church has been accorded some very limited freedoms. For instance, they were allowed to build a seminary, but there are no new permits allowed for churches to be constructed and that sort of thing. Public worship is still curtailed. It is the public airwaves, the state-owned media, is very infrequently made available to the church and to Cardinal Ortega, who is really the primate in Cuba. And himself, Cardinal Ortega, was in the labor camps for a while, was released in the late 60s. Here's Raul Castro, President Castro.
Your Holiness, Cuba receives you with affection and respect. We are honored by your presence. You will here find a people that is full of solidarity and instructed, that is trying to achieve justice, and in order to do that has no sacrifice. We worship the full dignity of the human person, with all and for the good of all. That's a quote from José Martí. A famous Cuban intellectual wrote, "The true face of the country is the face of justice and freedom." The nation doesn't have any other alternative. It is either independent or ceases to exist. The most powerful power that history has ever known has tried to spoil us fruitlessly of the right to freedom, to peace, and to justice. With patriotic virtue and principles and ethic principles, the Cuban people has resisted tenaciously, knowing that we are exercising a legitimate right when we follow our own way, defend our culture, and enrich it with the help of the most progressive ideas. Without reason, Cuba is slandered, but we trust that the truth that we have always followed, that we have never deviated, will in the end prevail. 14 years after the visit of John Paul II, the economic blockade and political and organized by the media continues. It has even become harder in the financial sector. As it is shown in the North American Memorandum of April the 6th, 1960, declassified the many decades after it was issued. Its objective still is to cause hunger, despair, and the toppling, the downfall of the government. Yet the nation has continued invariably changing everything that needs to be changed according to the highest aspirations of the Cuban people, and with the free participation of the people in the transcendental decisions of our society, including economic and social decisions, which in most of the world are the domain of narrow financial and political elites. Many generations of countrymen have fought for these ideals and noble objectives. We have faced, we have been deprived of many things, but we have never neglected our duty to share with those who are lacking. Just as an example of what we could do if solidarity prevailed, I mentioned during the last decade, with the help of Cuba, tens of thousands of physicians were trained from other countries. We have returned eyesight to 2.2 million people of low income, and we have contributed to the alphabetization of 5.8 million illiterate people. I can assure you that within our humble capacities, our international cooperation will continue. Your Holiness, we commemorate the fourth 100th anniversary of the finding and the presence of the image of Our Lady of Charity in El Cobre, which has embroidered the national crest. The recent pilgrimage of the Blessed Virgin through our country has united our people, believers and non-believers, in a very significant event. They keep her, Santiago de Cuba keeps her, which was protagonist of glorious episodes in the fight of Cubans for their final independence, and also the town of El Cobre, where the Spanish crown had to set free the slaves that rebelled in the mines 80 years before the abolition of such an infamous institution in our country. We're satisfied by the close relationship between the Holy See and Cuba that have been developed without interruption for 76 years, always based on mutual respect and a shared view on vital issues for humanity. Our government and the Catholic Church and the Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church in Cuba have good relations. The Cuban Constitution consecrates and guarantees full religious freedom of all its citizens. And it's on that basis the government of Cuba maintains good relations with all religions and religious institutions in our country. Your Holiness, almost 20 years ago, Fidel surprised many when he proclaimed that an important biological species was at risk of disappearing because its natural habitat was being depleted. The man, he concluded, there are growing threats to peace, and huge nuclear arsenals is another grave danger for the human person. Water and food will be, after carbon fossil fuels, the cause of the next expoliation war. The resources that are dedicated to the production of deadly weapons could be directed to the elimination of poverty. The rapid development of science and technology is not at the service of the solution of the great problems affecting humanity. It is very often used to create reflexes or manipulate public opinion. Finances are an oppressive power.
unterdrückende Macht heute.
Instead of solidarity,
se generaliza una crisis sistémica
a systemic crisis is generalized,
Solidarität
provoked by irrational
diese Krise zu
consumption
überwinden.
in the wealthy societies.
una ínfima parte de la población
A minimal part of the
acumula
population
enormes riquezas,
Ein winziger
has
Teil
amasses
der
great wealth,
sammelt und häuft
while the
unglaubliche
poor
Reichtümer.
increase, the hungry,
sin atención
those who are sick and do not get
desamparados.
any kind of attention.
En el mundo industrializado,
In the industrial
los
world,
indignados
In der
no
industrialisierten
soportan
Welt
más la injusticia.
those who are
ist
indignant
die
are no
Bewegung
longer
der
able
Indignados
to
entstanden, der Empörten.
Crece la desconfianza
to live with
en modelos
injustice,
sociales e
and among the youth
ideologías
especially,
que
there is
destruyen los
growing
valores
mistrust
espirituales
for ideologies that destroy spiritual values and produce exclusion and selfishness.
Es cierto que la crisis
It is
Bestimmte
true that the
Mechanismen
global
der Macht
crisis
schaffen
has a moral
ein
dimension,
permanentes Ungleichgewicht.
prevalece la falta de conexión
and there prevails a lack of connection between the governments and their citizens to whom they claim to serve. The corruption of politics and the lack of true democracy
Politik und
are evils of
der
our
Mangel an
time.
echter Demokratie sind echte Mängel
In
unserer
these
Zeit.
and other topics, we appreciate certain coincidences
Und
with your
in vielen
ideas.
dieser Dinge weiß ich Sie,
In the face of so many
alle Mann mit
challenges,
uns. Heiliger Vater,
our America is united in sovereignty and strives for an integration in solidarity to make a reality the bicentennial dream of its forefathers. Your Holiness will be able to talk to a people that has deep conviction, which will listen attentively
Sie
and
werden hier ein
respectfully.
Volk vorfinden, das Ihnen
In the name of the nation,
aufmerksam und wohlwollend zuhört.
I give you the most warm welcome. Thank you.
Ich heiße Sie herzlich willkommen.
And that was Raul Castro, the president of Cuba's particular version of his country and the world.
the
We can
world.
talk about it a little bit.
Yes.
Your quick thoughts as we await
No,
Pope Benedict's
I'd
words.
say, I mean,
Aus den Händen seines erkrankten
you
Bruders.
cannot deny reality. This is the same regime that kicked out priests, shut down Catholic schools,
Yeah.
confiscated private property. This is the same regime that has one of the most liberal abortion laws. You know.
Now Pope Benedict will talk about all of this.
Sehr geehrter Herr
The Pope is saying, Mr. President,
Kardinäle und liebe
dear
Mitglieder im Bischofsamt,
cardinals
geschätzte Vertreter des
and brother
öffentlichen
bishops,
Lebens,
distinguished
Mitglieder des
authorities,
diplomatischen Korps,
members of the diplomatic
Damen und
corps,
Herren,
ladies and
kubanische
gentlemen,
Freunde.
dear people of Cuba.
Ich danke Ihnen, Herr Präsident, für den Empfang und Ihre freundlichen Begrüßungsworte,
Thank you, Mr.
mit denen
President,
Sie
for
auch
your
die
welcome and
Ehrerbietung
your
der
kind
Regierung
words,
und des kubanischen
with
Volkes
which
gegenüber
you
dem Nachfolger
conveyed the
Pietro zum Ausdruck
sentiments
gebracht
of
haben.
respect of the
Ich grüße die
Cuban
Vertreter des
government
öffentlichen
and
Lebens,
people
die zugegen sind,
for the
wie auch die
successor of
anwesenden
Peter.
Mitglieder des diplomatischen Korps.
I greet the civil
Einen herzlichen
authorities
Gruß
here
richte ich an den
present,
Erzbischof von
as
Santiago
well
de
as the
Cuba und
members of the
Präsidenten der
diplomatic corps.
Bischofskonferenz.
I cordially greet the President of the Episcopal Conference, Archbishop Dionisio Guillermo Garcia Ibáñez of Santiago de
Außerdem
Cuba,
an den Erzbischof von
the
Havanna,
Archbishop
Kardinal
of
Jaime
Havana,
Ortega y Alamino,
Cardinal Jaime Ortega y Alamino,
und an die anderen bischöflichen Mitbrüder in Kuba,
and my other
denen
brother
ich all meine
bishops of
geistliche
Cuba.
Nähe bekunde.
and I assure them of my deep spiritual closeness.
Schließlich grüße ich ganz
Finally, I
von
greet
Herzen
with
die
heartfelt
Gläubigen der
affection
katholischen Kirche
all
in
the
Kuba,
faithful of the
die
Catholic
geschätzten
Church in
ansässigen
Cuba,
Insel und alle Kubaner,
the beloved
wo
people
auch
of this
immer sie sich
beautiful island,
befinden.
and all Cubans, wherever they may be. You are always present in my heart and
Ihr liegt mir
prayers,
stets am Herzen und ich bete für euch.
especially in the days
Das war ganz
preceding
besonders
the
in
much
diesen Tagen der Fall,
anticipated
als der
moment
ersehnte Augenblick des
of my
Besuches
visit
für euch
to you,
näher rückte. Der Dank
which the
göttlicher
grace
Güte nun Wirklichkeit
and
geworden
goodness
ist.
of God has made possible.
Wenn ich jetzt zu euch komme, kann ich es nicht unterlassen, an den denkwürdigen Besuch
Standing
meines
here among you, I
Vorgängers, des
cannot but
seligen Johannes
recall the
Pauls II.
historic
zu
visit
erinnern,
to Cuba of my
der eine
predecessor,
unauslöschliche
Blessed
Spur
John
in
Paul
der Seele
II,
der Kubaner
who left an
hinterlassen hat.
indelible mark on the
Für viele
souls of
Gläubige
all
und Nichtgläubige
Cubans.
stellen
For
sein
many, whether
Vorbild und
believers
sein
or
Lehre
not,
ein leuchtendes
his
Leitbild
example
dar.
and his
Das
teachings
sowohl im persönlichen
are a
Leben wie auch in
luminous
der
guide
öffentlichen Ausführung
for
des
their
Dienstes
personal
am
lives
Gemeinwohl
and
der
their
Nation
public activity in the
Orientierung
service
gibt.
of the common good of the nation.
In der Tat war seine Reise über die Insel wie eine
His
angenehme
visit to
Prise
this
frischer
island was
Luft,
like a
die der
gentle
Kirche in
breath
Kuba neu
of fresh
Kraft
air,
gegeben hat, das
which
in
gave
vielen ein
new
neues
strength
Bewusstsein für die Bedeutung des
to the
Glaubens
church in
wachrief
Cuba.
und sie ermutigte, die Herzen für Christus zu öffnen.
Awakening in many a renewed awareness of the importance of faith and inspiring them to open their hearts
Gleichzeitig
to
hat sie
Christ,
die Hoffnung entzündet
while
und
at the
das
same
Verlangen
time
geweckt, mutig für eine
kindling
bessere
their
Zukunft
hope
zu arbeiten.
and encouraging their
Eine der
desire
wichtigsten Früchte
to
dieses
work
Besuchs war die
fearlessly for a
Einleitung einer
better
neuen Phase
future.
in der Beziehung zwischen der Kirche und dem kubanischen Staat, im Geist stärkerer Zusammenarbeit und größeren Vertrauens.
One of the important fruits of that visit was the inauguration of a new
Bleiben noch
phase
viele Aspekte,
in
in
the
denen man
relationship in
vorankommen kann
Cuba
und muss,
between church
besonders
and
hinsichtlich
state,
des unerlässlichen
in a new
Beitrags, den die Religionen im
spirit of
öffentlichen Bereich der
cooperation
Gesellschaft zu
and
leisten
trust.
berufen sind.
Even if many areas remain in which greater progress can and ought to be made, especially as regards the indispensable public contribution that religion is called to make in the life of a society.
Ich freue mich
I am
sehr,
pleased to
mich
share
mit
your
euch in der
joy
Freude
as you
anlässlich
celebrate
der
the
400-Jahr-Feier
400th
der Aufführung des
anniversary
Gnadenbildes der
of the discovery
barmherzigen
of the
Jungfrau von
holy
El Cobre zu
statue
feiern.
of Our Lady of Charity
Ihre
of El
einzigartige
Cobre.
Gestalt war von Anfang an sowohl im
Since
persönlichen
the
Leben der
beginning,
Kubaner als auch in
she
den
has been
großen
very
Ereignissen des
much
Landes
present
sehr
in the personal
gegenwärtig,
lives of Cubans,
besonders als es seine Unabhängigkeit
as well as
erlangte.
in the great events of the nation, especially since independence, for she is honored
Sie
by
wurde von
all
allen als
as
wahre
the
Mutter des
true
kubanischen
mother
Volkes
of the
verehrt.
Cuban people.
Die Verehrung der Virgin
Devotion
Mambisa
to
hat
the
den Glauben
Virgin
gestärkt und dazu
Mambisa
ermutigt, zu verteidigen und
sustained
zu
the faith
fördern, was die
and
Lebensbedingungen
inspired
des
the
Menschen und
defense
seine
and
Grundrechte
promotion
würdig macht.
of all that gives dignity to the human
Sie tut es heute
condition
weiterhin mit noch größerer
and
Kraft
its
und gibt so ein
fundamental
sichtbares
rights,
Zeugnis für die Fruchtbarkeit der Verkündigung des Evangeliums in
and
diesem
continues
Land
to do
und
so
die tiefen
today,
christlichen Wurzeln
with even greater
dieser
strength,
innersten
giving
Identität der
visible
kubanischen
witness to the
Seele Leben
fruitfulness
verleihen.
of the preaching of the gospel in these lands, and to the profound Christian roots which take shape, which shape the deepest identity of the Cuban soul. Following in the footsteps of countless pilgrims down the centuries, I too wish to go to El Cobre, to kneel at the feet of the Mother of God, to thank her for her concern for all her Cuban children, and to ask her to guide the future of this beloved nation in the ways of justice, peace, freedom, and reconciliation. I come to Cuba as a pilgrim of charity to confirm my brothers and sisters in the faith and strengthen them in the hope which is born of the presence of God's love in our lives. I carry in my heart the just aspirations and legitimate desires of all Cubans, wherever they may be, their sufferings and their joys, their concerns and their noblest desires, those of the young and the elderly, of adolescents and children, of the sick and workers, of prisoners and their families, and of the poor and those in need. Many parts of the world today are experiencing a time of particular economic difficulty that not a few people regard as part of a profound spiritual and moral crisis which has left humanity devoid of values and defenseless because the ambition and selfishness of certain powers which take little account of the true good of individuals and families. We can no longer continue in the same cultural and moral direction which has caused the painful situation that many suffer. On the other
Im
hand,
Gegenteil, wahrer
real
Fortschritt
progress
braucht eine Ethik, die den
calls
Menschen in den
for an
Mittelpunkt stellt
ethics
und seine echten
which
Bedürfnisse
focuses on the
berücksichtigt,
human
besonders
person
was seine geistige und
and takes
religiöse
account of the
Dimension betrifft.
most profound human needs, especially man's spiritual and religious dimension.
Daher wird es im Herzen und im
In the
Geist
hearts and
vieler
minds
immer
of
mehr
many,
zur Gewissheit,
The
dass es
way
für die
is
Erneuerung
thus
der
opening
Gesellschaft
to
und
an
der Welt
ever greater
rechtschaffener
certainty
Menschen mit
that the
festen moralischen
rebirth of
Überzeugungen
society
und hohen
demands
grundlegenden Werten bedarf,
upright men
die nicht
and
unter
women
dem Einfluss
of
bestimmter
firm
Interessen
moral
stehen,
convictions,
sondern der unwandelbaren und
with
transzendenten
noble
Natur des Menschen
and
entsprechen.
strong values, who will not be manipulated by dubious interests, and who are respectful of the unchanging and transcendent nature of the human person.
Liebe Freunde, ich bin überzeugt, dass Kuba in diesem so wichtigen Augenblick seine
Dear friends,
Geschichte
I'm
schon auf das
convinced that
Morgen
Cuba,
schaut
at this moment of
sich daher
particular
bemüht, seine
importance in its
Horizonte zu
history,
erneuern
is already
und zu
looking to the
weiten.
future,
Dazu
and
trägt
thus
das große
is
Erbe an
striving to
geistigen und
renew
moralischen
and
Werten
broaden
bei,
its
die seine
horizons.
wahre Identität geformt haben.
Of great
die
help
sich
in
im
this
Werk und Leben
enterprise
vieler
will be the
berühmter
fine
Söhne des Landes
patrimony
eingeprägt
of
finden.
spiritual and moral values which fashioned the nation's true identity and which stand out in the work and the life of many distinguished fathers of the country, of Blessed José Olayo y Valdés, the servant of God, Felix
Die
Varela,
Kirche ihrerseits konnte durch
and
ihre
the acclaimed
großzügige
José
und
Martí.
hingebungsvolle Seelsorge
For her
sehr
part,
zur
the Church
Förderung
too
solcher
has
Werte
diligently
beitragen,
contributed to the
bekräftigt ihre
cultivation
Absicht, weiter
of those
rastlos
values
zu
through her
arbeiten,
generous
allen Kubanern
and
besser
selfless
zu dienen.
pastoral mission, and renews her commitment to work tirelessly the better to serve all Cubans. I ask the Lord to bless
Ich bitte den
abundantly
Herrn, dass dieses Land
this
und seine
land
Kinder reichlich
and
segne
its
und
children,
besonders denen nahe ist,
in
die sich
particular
benachteiligt fühlen,
those who
den
feel
Ausgegrenzten
disadvantaged
und allen, den Leib und
and
Seele
excluded,
leiden, und dass er auf die
and all
Fürsprache
those
der
who
barmherzigen
suffer
Jungfrau von El
in body
Cobre
or spirit.
allen eine Zukunft voll Hoffnung,
At the same time,
Solidarität und
I pray that
Eintracht
through the
schenkt.
intercession of Our Lady of Charity of El Cobre, He will grant to all a future of hope, solidarity, and harmony. Thank you. Wow, the big cheer goes up. Some very direct words here. You don't have to be a reader of tea leaves to figure out what the Pope was saying.
Yes.
In rather explicit terms, I
Sure.
thought.
Ein warmes
Clearly, the
dankbares
takeaway
Händeschütteln auch von
lines here.
Präsident Raul Castro.
He talked about, in general terms, many parts of the world today are experiencing a time of particular economic difficulty. So he didn't say Cuba, but then he went on. And he said, not a few people regard as part of a profound spiritual and moral crisis, which has left humanity devoid of values and defenseless before the ambition and selfishness of certain powers, which take little account of the true good of individuals and families. How do you think this is being
Well, I think
interpreted?
Well, I think that the contrast between the two messages could not be more dramatic. On the one hand, you have, I mean, just quoting on what the Pope has said, an anachronic message of division and class warfare. That was what we heard.
Coming from Raul Castro.
Trying to deny history, facts of history. I mean, priests were expelled from Cuba, and those who were even of Cuban birth. So, I mean, to claim that you have always stood for religious freedom is at best and a glossing up of history, you know.
Yeah, no, he really went through the whole litany of the
very
revolution.
outdated. It seemed like movies from the 60s or 70s.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
no, it was complaining about the
exporting
embargo.
solidarity also, when does he call sending guerrilla warriors to Latin America to engulf Latin America in a bloodbath? Is that his brand of solidarity? I mean, so it seemed like a discourse that was stuck in the 60s and 70s. Whereas the Holy Father comes with a message for the future, a message of reconciliation, of hope, of trying to bring people together and turn the page on a sad chapter in Cuban history so that they can move on.
And we should mention that. I mean, from Raul Castro, we heard embargo was derided. Fidel surprised everyone by saying that men are endangered. Yeah, men are endangered in Cuba. I mean, look at the carnage that this revolution bred.
I mean, to be pro-lifer in Cuba is to be a counter-revolutionary. So where is the respect for the dignity of the human person that he claims? I mean, people have been harassed by the government for the crime of being pro-lifers.
And he also mentioned the other part. He said, "Oh well, our thoughts converge on your, Holy Father, understanding of the haves and the have-nots." And he mentioned in the industrialized world, they're oppressing a whole group of people, and there's a corruption of politics in North America. I mean, he really laid out the whole vision. Then the Pope shows up and invokes Our Lady of Charity, and he said something really interesting. He said, it's really important, this is the 400th anniversary of Our Lady of Charity, the discovery of the statue, and that she has been such a part of Cuban history. And there was a line here where he said, the Christian roots which shape the deepest identity of the Christian soul. And he talked about the Virgin being the true, a keystone, if you will, to the true identity of the Cuban people.
Yes, yes, which is something that these kinds of regimes try to sever, you know, that identity between the religious expression of the culture and the religious foundation of civil society, because I mean it's a fact of life. It cannot be denied that the church played a very important role in the birth of the Latin American countries. In most Latin American countries, where there were priests who were pushing for democracy, for liberal reforms. The Holy Father mentioned Felix Varela, who is called as or people refer to him as the man who taught Cubans how to think. He had to go himself into exile before Cuban independence because of his progressive ideas. But as the Holy Father said, these priests, enlightened by the gospel, were advocating true progress, not a fake version, you know. Right. And then another thing that I think strikes or displays the contrast between these two men, when the Pope talked about human dignity, but he also talked about transcendence.
Yes.
And we know that transcendence simply does not exist.
Well, there was a great line. He said, "Dear friends," near the end of the address, and this is the welcoming ceremony. Imagine what we're going to hear in the homily later today and in the coming events here. "Dear friends, I'm convinced that Cuba at this moment of particular importance in its history is already looking to the future, and thus is striving to renew and broaden its horizons." He clearly is pointing the way past the regime as it exists today.
You have a regime, like the Holy Father said, a regime that is stuck in the conflicts of the 60s with an outdated ideology, in a Soviet-style style of government, and the Vicar of Christ who is coming with the light of the gospel to show the way to the future. I mean, the contrast could not be more dramatic, I think.
It's really something to watch. And right down to the military review here, which, you know, could be a poor man's stand-in for the Red Army, as they march across the tarmac here, in a display of I think they're trying to accord the Pope full honors, and that's you know, I'm sure it's a well-intentioned display. But he made that good point. Of great help in this enterprise will be the fine patrimony of the spiritual and moral values which fashion the true nation's true identity, and which stands out in the work of the life of so many distinguished fathers of the country. And he went on to recite them, including
Father Varela.
Felix Varela, who's a priest and a servant of God.
I mean, and whom the Holy Father John Paul II quoted when he visited the University of Havana from his masterpiece Letters to Elpidio, which has echoes also of Washington's farewell discourse.
Address,
Tell them, says Father Varela in his Letters to Elpidio, tell to the youth that they are the hope of the fatherland, but that there is no fatherland without virtue, religion has to be the foundation of civic society, not so much because you want a theocracy, but because religion gives you an anthropological framework that you need to build up institutions from the bottom up, with the individual and the family, all the way to the state. Whereas when you try to impose a top-down approach, redefine the family, oppress the individual, then it just can't work.
Yeah, it simply doesn't work. And again, we are seeing a lessening of tension. You see the Pope now entering the airport there. I think we've lost a video of him. He stepped past the azaleas and we lost him. We may see more image. There he is. Making his way in, Cardinal Bertone at his side, Raul Castro, the president of Cuba, on the other side of the Pope. And they're climbing the steps here. In 2010, in November of 2010, there was what was perceived as a pretty seismic cooling of relations, in that the Castro government allowed the church to build a seminary and open it in 2010, in November of 2010. Again, though, that's a very limited gain. It's the freedom of worship, but not necessarily the freedom of religion.
Yes, no, definitely. It's a very difficult situation for the church in Cuba, because on the one hand, you do not want to be you want to be an agent of reconciliation, you want to be an agent of justice, but at the same time you don't want to be manipulated by the government. On the other hand, the government readily recognizes that the church is a threat to its agenda, to its inhuman agenda, so it uses several strategies trying to manipulate the church, but also harassing the church. And then on the other hand, it's a difficult position for the church, because there are many people who have suffered a lot, who have lost patience, and who would like to see dramatic change immediately, and who would not even care that if change was violent. And in the midst of that, there's the church in Cuba trying to bring people together, lead the way forward to the future, to a future where there is freedom, a respect for human dignity, reconciliation among all the Cubans. It's a very difficult situation, the Cuban situation.
No, and
especially for the bishops.
Cardinal Ortega of Havana has been subject to really pretty heavy criticism over the last few weeks by members of the Cuban dissident community here in the United States, human rights advocates who want more. We have to remember, Jaime Ortega, as the Cardinal of Havana, is not a public official. He's not. He has no powers in the government. I think he's trying to maneuver with what little room he's been able to scrape out. But we have to remember, up until 1967, when he was released, he was in the labor camp. He was one of those priests put in labor camp. It would have been very easy, as so many other priests who were in similar situations, they left the island. Jaime Ortega said, I'm going to stay here. I vow to stay here. And he has. And I understand the impatience of some, and it is terrible what's happening.
No, and it's there's a lot of suffering, a lot of suffering. You hear horror stories. I can tell you, I am not a Cuban myself, but being for so long in Miami, the amount of suffering that some people have endured, it breaks your heart. But at the same time, we need to be reminded again and again of the words of John Paul II. Justice without mercy degenerates into vengeance, and violence breeds more violence. So what the church is trying to accomplish here is show the way for a future with freedom and respect for human dignity, but that also involves the reconciliation of all Cubans. And sure enough, reconciliation has to be predicated on justice, and justice demands the truth. But at the same time, there has to be also mercy. I mean, in order to be reconciled, forgiveness needs to be sought, but it has to be granted and afforded too. And that's very difficult and very painful. If you have been in prison for 15 years, tortured, your brother has been shot, it's very difficult.
Well, we are going to get into much more of this in the situation in Cuba when our coverage continues. That will be later this afternoon. And we hope you'll join us later today at 6:15 Eastern Time for Pope Benedict's first Mass from Cuba in Santiago. He'll be commemorating the 400th anniversary of Our Lady of Charity, of El Cobre. And I'll be joined once again by Father Roberto Cid of Radio Paz, and we hope you'll join us as well. In the meantime, we'll be getting information to you on Facebook, on Twitter. Go to EWTN.com. You can follow me at RaymondArroyo.com. I'm on Twitter and Facebook. I'll queue up some of these documents for you so you can read what the Pope said. Really important opening address, though, and just the beginning. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again later today. Bye now.